The night was colder than usual in Portland, and the streets shimmered under a thin layer of rain. Ethan Walker stood in the hallway of an old brick building, clutching an envelope that felt lighter than his heart. Inside were only $40, everything he had left after losing his job a week ago. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and old paint, the kind of scent that belonged to quiet places where stories waited to be heard. He took a deep breath and knocked softly on the door marked 3B. The door opened, and his landlady, Margaret Lane, stood there with a gentle look in her eyes. She was in her early 40s, dressed in a warm cardigan, her hair tied loosely like someone who had spent the evening reading by the fire. Her presence carried a calmness that made people want to talk to her. Even when they didn't know what to say, Ethan hesitated, his voice catching before it came out. "Ms. Lane, I'm sorry to bother you this late. I just wanted to talk about the rent." He held up the envelope like an apology. "I don't have the full amount this month. I can give you this now, and the rest next week. I promise." Margaret didn't answer right away. Her eyes softened as she looked at the young man in front of her, tired, drenched from the rain, but still trying to do the right thing. She had seen that look before. Life had a way of humbling good people, and she could tell Ethan was one of them. After a moment, she spoke gently. "Ethan, no rent tonight." He blinked, unsure if he heard her correctly. I can pay part of it, at least. I don't want to take advantage." She shook her head. "That's not what I said. I said no rent tonight. Come in first. You look freezing." Confused but too tired to argue, Ethan stepped inside. Her apartment was warm, filled with the soft glow of a lamp and the comforting smell of something freshly baked. A kettle hummed quietly on the stove, and there was a tray on the table with 2 bowls of stew. "Sit," she said kindly, motioning toward a chair. "You look like you haven't eaten in days." Ethan hesitated. "I don't want to impose. You're not," she interrupted softly. "You're my tenant, not a stranger." He sat down, and for a moment the warmth of the room melted the weight he'd been carrying all week. He hadn't expected kindness tonight. He had expected disappointment, maybe even anger. Instead, he was being offered a bowl of stew and a gentle voice that felt like home as she served him. He noticed the little details around her apartment, watercolor paintings on the wall, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, a vase with a single daisy. It was a quiet space, but it carried life in the small, ordinary things. He finally spoke. "I really appreciate this." "You didn't have to." Margaret smiled as she sat across from him. "I know, but sometimes people need a small break before they can stand again." They ate in silence for a while, the sound of the rain outside filling the gaps between their words. The stew was simple: potatoes, carrots, a bit of chicken. It tasted like comfort. He didn't realize how hungry he was until the bowl was empty. When he finished, he leaned back, sighing quietly. "It's been a rough few days," he admitted. "The printing company shut down my section. I've been trying to find anything that pays, but it's not easy." Margaret nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've been living here for almost a year now, always on time with rent, always polite. I know this isn't you being careless." He smiled weakly. "Thank you for saying that. I just hate being in this position." "I understand," she said softly. "I lost my job once too, years ago. And my husband soon after. Sometimes life doesn't ask if you're ready before it changes everything." Her words carried a quiet sadness, but not bitterness. It was the kind of honesty that came from surviving storms and still believing in tomorrow. Ethan didn't know what to say, so he just listened. There was something comforting about her openness. After a pause, she added, "You don't owe me anything tonight." "I meant what I said. I'm not waiving your rent. I'm just saying you don't have to think about it tonight. Sometimes people need one night where they can breathe." He looked at her, puzzled. "Why are you being so kind?" Margaret smiled, her eyes warm. "Because once someone was kind to me when I thought I didn't deserve it, and it changed everything." The clock on the wall ticked quietly. The air between them felt lighter now, like to people who had both been carrying too much for too long. When Ethan finally stood to leave, she walked him to the door. "Thank you, Ms. Lane, for the food and for understanding." She smiled faintly. Get some rest, Ethan. Tomorrow we'll need you strong. He nodded, holding the envelope in his hand again. He thought of offering it to her once more, but something about her tone told him not to. Instead, he just said good night. As he stepped out into the hallway, the rain had softened into a drizzle. He walked back to his small apartment, his steps slower, his heart lighter. For the first time in days, he didn't feel completely alone. Behind her door, Margaret sat back at her table, staring at the empty bowl across from her. It had been months since she'd shared a meal with anyone. The sound of another person's voice in her home, even for an hour, had reminded her what warmth felt like. She looked toward the window, where the rain traced slow paths down the glass. Her husband used to say that kindness always found its way back. She wondered if tonight was proof of that. And in the small apartment downstairs, Ethan set the envelope on his table and smiled faintly. He still had problems, no job security, overdue bills, but something had shifted inside him. A stranger's kindness had reached him when he least expected it. As he turned off the light, he whispered to himself, "No rent tonight." The words sounded simple, but they carried hope, the kind that could rebuild someone quietly, piece by piece. Neither of them knew it yet. But that one evening, that single act of compassion would be the start of something neither expected. A connection built not from need, but from understanding. The rain continued through the night, washing the city clean, as two lonely hearts began to find warmth where they least imagined in each other's kindness. The next evening, Ethan found himself walking up the stairs to Margaret's apartment again, though this time he wasn't holding an envelope. He had just come back from dropping off a few job applications downtown, his shoes soaked from the rain. The light from apartment 3B glowed softly under the door. He hesitated for a moment before knocking. When Margaret opened the door, she looked pleasantly surprised. "Ethan," she said, "you're back." He smiled awkwardly. "I just wanted to return your bowl from last night. And, say thank you for the meal." She took the bowl with a smile. "Come in, I just made fresh bread." He almost refused, but the smell of baked bread and cinnamon pulled him inside. The small kitchen was warm again, and the table was set for two. It felt less like an invitation and more like something natural, as if they both needed the company. They sat across from each other, steam rising from their cups of tea. "Did you find anything today?" she asked gently. "Not yet," he replied. "I left applications at a few places, a bookstore, a repair shop, and a delivery service. Everyone says they'll call, but no one does." Margaret nodded slowly. "It's a tough time of year. People are hiring less before the holidays." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Feels strange, being home this much. I keep thinking I should be doing more." She smiled kindly. "Sometimes doing less is what saves you. When I lost my job teaching, I thought I'd never recover. Then I started baking, painting, fixing things around here. It's helped." Ethan glanced at the paintings hanging behind her, soft watercolors of rivers, trees, and sunsets. "You painted those?" She followed his gaze. "Yes. Before my husband passed, I painted almost every day. After he was gone, I stopped." He didn't ask why. He could feel the story behind her silence, the way her eyes dimmed slightly, the way her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. Loss didn't always need words. It was something people could sense in each other. They ate in quiet comfort for a few minutes. The bread was warm, soft, and slightly sweet. "This is amazing," he said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied. "It's my mother's recipe. She used to say baking is like therapy. You mix what's broken and turn it into something new." That made him smile. "That's actually beautiful." Margaret chuckled softly. She was full of sayings like that. "I didn't appreciate them much when I was young, but now they make more sense." The room felt cozy, rain tapping against the window, fire crackling softly in the corner. It was the kind of warmth that felt rare in a busy, lonely world. After a pause, Ethan asked, "Do you ever get lonely here? This place feels so big for one person." She hesitated, then nodded. I do. I thought I liked the quiet, but after a while it becomes too quiet. You start missing things you didn't even notice before. Small conversations. The sound of someone laughing in another room. He nodded slowly, understanding her better than he expected. Yeah, I get that. Since I lost my job, I barely talk to anyone. My friends are all busy and my family's across the country. It's just quiet. There was a small silence. Then Margaret smiled faintly. Then maybe tonight we can help each other a little. Ethan looked up. How? By talking, she said simply. By not letting the world outside feel so heavy. So they talked, not about rent or work or problems, but about little things, about favorite movies, old memories, and the places they wanted to visit one day. Ethan learned that Margaret had once dreamed of opening an art cafe, a place where people could paint, drink coffee, and talk about life. She learned that Ethan loved books more than anything, especially stories about ordinary people doing brave things. Time slipped by faster than either of them noticed. The rain outside turned into a steady rhythm, like a background song meant just for them. At one point she asked, "Do you still believe things can get better?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I want to. I just don't know when." Margaret smiled softly. "Then maybe believing is enough for now." He looked at her, looked at her, and saw something in her expression that made him feel steady again. She wasn't someone trying to fix him. She was someone who understood him. That kind of understanding felt rare, and he didn't want to take it for granted. When the clock struck 10, Ethan stood to leave. "Thank you again." "For everything," he said. She walked him to the door. "You don't owe me thanks, Ethan. You just needed someone to remember that you're not alone. Sometimes that's more important than rent." He smiled, a little shyly. "I'll still pay it, you know." "I know," she said, smiling back. "But not tonight." It's that same phrase again. Soft, gentle, full of meaning. No rent tonight. But this time, he understood it wasn't about money. It was about grace. About giving someone space to breathe, to heal, to start again. As he walked downstairs, Ethan realized how different the world felt compared to just 24 hours ago. Nothing huge had changed. He still didn't have a job. His future was still uncertain, but inside something had shifted. The loneliness that used to feel endless now had a small light in it. He lay in bed later, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, and thought about her words. Maybe believing is enough for now. He repeated them to himself until he fell asleep. Meanwhile, upstairs, Margaret sat by her window, sketchbook open, pencil in hand. She hadn't drawn anything in months. But tonight, something inside her felt alive again. She began sketching, not a landscape, not her late husband, but a small figure standing in the rain, holding an envelope, eyes filled with hope. It was Ethan. She smiled to herself as she drew, realizing she hadn't felt this kind of warmth in a long time. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was something deeper than simple kindness. It was connection to people both a little lost, finding comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the rain finally stopped. The city was quiet, but not lonely. Inside two small apartments, hearts that had once been heavy were beginning to feel light again. Ethan would knock on her door again soon, not because he owed rent, but because something about her company made him feel human again. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew this was just the beginning of something gentle, healing, and unexpected. The night ended softly, with one simple truth lingering between them, that sometimes warmth doesn't come from money or luck. It comes from kindness shared at the right moment by the right person. Weeks passed, and slowly Ethan's life began to take shape again. He found part-time work at a small bookstore near the river, a quiet place filled with the scent of paper and old wood. It didn't pay much, but it gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Every evening after closing up, he'd walk home through the chilly Portland streets, the bookstore lights fading behind him. And almost every night, the warm glow from apartment 3B would be waiting, Margaret had a way of keeping her door half open when she knew he'd be back. Sometimes she'd greet him with a simple, "Come in, I made tea." Other nights there'd be soup simmering on the stove or soft jazz playing on her old record player. Their dinners had become a quiet tradition. No invitation needed, no awkwardness. Just comfort shared between two people who had learned to find peace in each other's company. That evening, the smell of tomato soup filled the apartment. Ethan walked in, shaking off the cold. "Smells good," he said with a grin. "Perfect for this weather," Margaret replied, ladling soup into bowls. "How was work today?" "Busy," he said, taking off his jacket. "A woman asked for a book on antique flowers, and I spent half an hour helping her find it. She said people don't do that anymore." Margaret smiled. "That's because people rush too much now. No one slows down to listen." Ethan nodded. "I guess I like that bookstore for the same reason I like being here. It feels calm." They ate quietly, listening to the soft hum of rain outside. After a moment, Ethan noticed something new. An easel standing in the corner with a half-finished canvas resting on it. Soft shades of blue and gold painted a sunrise that looked halfway alive. He set his spoon down. "You started painting again," he said, eyes brightening. Margaret hesitated, following his gaze. "I did, but I can't seem to finish it. Every time I try, I freeze. It's like the moment I pick up the brush, everything I used to feel just disappears." Ethan walked over to the canvas, studying it. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "But maybe it doesn't need to be finished to be good. Maybe it's already saying something." She gave a small laugh. "That sounds like something an artist would say." "Or someone who understands how it feels to start over," he said. Their eyes met briefly, and there was something gentle and unspoken between them, the kind of connection that doesn't need words to exist. That night, after dinner, they stayed up talking by the window. Margaret told him stories about her years teaching art at the community college. How her students brought color into her life. How her husband used to help her clean brushes after class. There was sadness in her tone, but also fondness. "I stopped painting after he passed," she admitted softly. "It felt wrong to create beauty when he wasn't there to see it." Ethan listened carefully. "Maybe he'd want you to keep painting, not for him, but for yourself." She looked at him with a faint smile. "You sound wiser than your age." He shrugged. "You start to learn things when life gets quiet." The clock ticked and the rain outside deepened. For a long time, they sat there in silence, two lives slowly finding rhythm again. Margaret poured more tea, and Ethan found himself talking about his childhood, about his mother's bookstore back in Ohio, about the nights he used to help her stack shelves. She used to say that books were proof that even broken stories can have beautiful endings. Kay said, "I didn't really get it until now." Margaret smiled gently. "I think your mother was right." Over the next few days, their evenings became a quiet habit. They shared small things, laughter, stories, silence. Ethan started helping her fix things around the building. A loose doorknob, a squeaky window, a leaky pipe. In return, she'd make dinner or teach him how to mix colors for painting. It wasn't a transaction, it was just life shared. One Sunday afternoon, he found her sitting on the porch, a sketchbook in her lap. She looked peaceful, sunlight falling softly on her face. He handed her a cup of coffee. "You look like you're in another world," he said. "Maybe I am," she replied with a smile. "I was sketching you." He blinked. "Me." She turned the book around, and there it was, a simple pencil sketch of him reading a book near the window. It wasn't perfect, but it felt alive. "You've been my inspiration lately," she said softly. "Not in a romantic way, just, you remind me that life keeps moving." He looked at the drawing, touched. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." Margaret looked at him for a moment longer, then said, "Ethan, do you know what I see in you? Resilience. Most people give up when things fall apart, but you still hope." He smiled faintly. "Maybe because you gave me a reason to." The air between them grew quiet again, not uncomfortable, just filled with unspoken warmth. There was no rush, no need for dramatic words. That evening, as the sun set, They stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on. Margaret picked up her paintbrush again and said, "Would you stay for a bit? I want to try finishing that painting tonight." Ethan nodded. Of course. He sat beside her, handing her brushes, adjusting the easel, offering quiet encouragement. She painted slowly, carefully, each stroke bringing color back into the world. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. When she finally set the brush down, she took a step back. The sunrise on the canvas looked alive now, full of light and promise. She exhaled, smiling for the first time in a way that reached her eyes. "It's beautiful," he said softly. She looked at him and whispered, "It feels like breathing again." Outside, the rain had stopped and the night was calm. Something had shifted between them. Not romance, not yet, but something deeper. It was trust. It was the comfort of knowing that broken things could be made whole again, as Ethan left that night. She stood at the door, watching him walk down the hallway. There was pride in her eyes, not because of what he had done, but because of how far he had come. And when he reached his apartment, he found himself smiling. For the first time in years, he felt anchored. He had come to this building lost, but now he had something to look forward to, someone who made the world feel less lonely. Upstairs, Margaret cleaned her brushes and looked at the finished painting. It glowed under the lamplight, a sunrise full of color and hope. For the first time since her husband's passing, she whispered a quiet thank you, not to anyone in particular, but to life itself. Neither of them said it aloud, but they both felt it. The start of something gentle, something that could one day grow into love. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was just two hearts learning to heal one evening at a time under the soft light of apartment 3B. A month later, the winter sun broke through the Portland clouds for the first time in weeks. The air was crisp, the streets shimmered after the rain, and Ethan felt lighter than he had in months. He walked home from the bookstore holding his first proper paycheck. Not much, but honest work. The envelope in his pocket wasn't just money. It was proof that he was standing on his own feet again. He climbed the stairs to apartment 3B, smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't seen Margaret since last night, when they stayed up late talking about art and how the smallest acts of kindness could change lives. Tonight he wanted to give her what he owed, not just rent, but gratitude. He knocked on the door gently. Margaret opened it, surprised to see him holding an envelope. "Ethan," she said warmly, "you're early." He grinned. "I got paid today, and I came to finally settle my rent. Full amount. No delays." He handed her the envelope proudly. She looked at it for a moment, then smiled softly. "You're persistent, aren't you?" "I said I'd pay you back," he replied. "You helped me when I had nothing. I want to make things right." Margaret took the envelope, held it for a second, then placed it gently back in his hand. "Ethan, I told you before, no rent tonight." He laughed lightly. "Margaret, you can't keep saying that forever. I don't want you to think I'm taking advantage." Her eyes softened. "You've already given me more than money could. You gave me company, laughter, and a reason to paint again. You don't owe me rent for that." He fell quiet, unsure how to respond. "I don't know what to say." She smiled, her tone calm but warm. "Say you'll stay for dinner. I made your favorite soup." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Only if I can help this time." "Deal," she said, stepping aside to let him in. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air. The apartment felt different that night, brighter somehow. There were 2 candles on the table, and in the corner her finished painting stood proudly on the easel. The sunrise glowed across the canvas, full of life. As they cooked together, laughter filled the space. Margaret taught him how to chop vegetables properly, and he teased her for being too serious about recipes. It was simple, natural, and full of warmth, the kind that only comes when 2 people truly enjoy being around each other. After dinner, they sat by the window with tea, watching the streetlights flicker. "You know," Ethan said quietly, "when I lost my job, I thought everything was over. I couldn't even face people. But then you opened your door, and everything changed." Margaret looked at him softly. Maybe it was time for both of us to change. I'd been living like a shadow in this house. You reminded me how to live again." There was a silence, gentle, not awkward, the kind that carried meaning without needing words. Ethan's eyes went to the painting again. "You finished it. Key?" she said proudly. "You were right. I didn't need to paint for anyone else. Just for myself. It's beautiful," he whispered. "It looks like hope." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what it is." For a moment, they just sat there, the world outside fading away. The clock ticked softly. The city hummed in the distance. And the air between them felt full, not with romance yet, but with something deeper, something honest. Then Margaret said quietly, "Ethan, I've been thinking. The small apartment downstairs, the one you're renting, it's drafty, and the heater barely works. You could move in here if you wanted. I've got a spare room. It might help both of us." He blinked in surprise. "Move in here." "I don't want to intrude." "You wouldn't be," she said gently. "I've spent too long alone. And you could help me with the building maintenance, small repairs. It's a fair trade." Ethan hesitated, caught between gratitude and uncertainty. "You really mean that?" "I do," she said simply. "You've become part of this place, Ethan, part of my life too. It feels right." He looked at her, realizing how much she meant those words. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like a tenant. He felt like someone who belonged. He smiled softly. "Then I'd be honored." Margaret's eyes brightened. "Good, then it's settled. No rent ever again." They both laughed, the sound filling the small apartment like music. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about trust, connection, and something quietly growing between them. As days turned into weeks, their lives began to blend naturally. Ethan fixed things around the building doors, faucets, lights, and Margaret cooked, painted, and shared her days with him. They developed a rhythm, an unspoken understanding. Mornings started with coffee and small talk. Evenings ended with shared laughter and calm silences. Sometimes she'd paint while he read aloud from his favorite books. Other times, they'd sit outside, wrapped in blankets, watching the city lights reflect on the wet pavement. There was no rush, no expectation, just two souls learning to heal side by side. One night, snow began to fall outside. Margaret placed her brush down and turned to him. "Do you ever think about what brought you here?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly. "Every day. Losing my job felt like the worst thing that could happen. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the road that led me here." "To this apartment?" she asked playfully. "To you?" he said quietly. Her expression softened, emotion flickering in her eyes. "You've become a light in this house. Ethan, I didn't realize how much I needed someone to remind me that life can still be beautiful." He smiled. "And you reminded me that kindness still exists." The candlelight flickered between them, gentle and warm. They didn't need to say more. In that moment, everything made sense. Months later, the painting she'd made, the sunrise, hung in the living room. Beneath it, two coffee mugs sat side by side on the table, and laughter often filled the walls. They never labeled what they had. It didn't need a name. It was understanding, comfort, and maybe quietly love. Every now and then, Ethan would joke, "So, when do I start paying rent again?" And every time, Margaret would smile and say, "No rent tonight." It became their phrase, not just a reminder of that first night, but a symbol of how kindness had changed both their lives, and in that small apartment on a quiet Portland street. Two people who once felt forgotten by the world found something worth keeping: warmth, belonging, and a love built not on grand gestures, but on simple moments that felt real in the end. No rent tonight wasn't just a kind phrase. It was a promise that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person who opens their door when you need it most.